Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Islam Explained. Today we'll be looking at a very complex topic which will be on the area of qadar, destiny and free will. So we have here again our theologian, Omar Ergi. Welcome.
Hello, Aysel. Thank you.
Thank you to have you here, Omar. Can you explain to us what qadar is, destiny and free will?
Yes, inshallah.
Such a complex area of topic.
Yeah, it is actually. It is a very complex and confusing topic, and not only for Muslims, it is confusing to other people as well. The topic has been debated since the early classical times, but even today, in the Western world, philosophers sort of debate on it as well. Now, from an Islamic perspective, lexically, the term qadar means measure. That is the actual definition of the term, due measure. However, in Islamic context, it means predestination, preordainment, as commonly known, which we say destiny. And in the Quran, if we look at the Quran, there are verses that are indicating to qadar, destiny. One verse, very important verse, Inna kulla shay'in khalaqnahu biqadar. We have created everything with destiny. And there is also a very interesting verse which became the debate on whether destiny and free will can coexist. And that verse is Wallahu khalaqakum wa ma ta'amalun. So he creates you and your actions. Two important terms if we want to sort of analyze destiny. One is Imam Mubin and the other one is Kitab Mubin. These two terms we should remember if we want to really understand the concept of qadar. The first one is Imam Mubin, the infinite knowledge of God. This is his sifat, which we call ilm. His sifat is ilm, which he has infinite knowledge. So according to this attribute of Allah, he knows the past, he knows the future. Therefore, knowledge about the universe with all of its details has been recorded on what we call Levh-i Mahfuz, the preserved tablet. This is called qadar in a nutshell. This is called qadar, destiny. Kitab Mubin is when the time of creation, what is already known by Allah and what is already recorded comes, Kitab Mubin brings it into existence. So one concept, which we say qadar, is the concept of that infinite knowledge and everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Almighty God, knows. And the other concept is when this knowledge, when the time comes, Allah brings it into existence through the concept of Kitab Mubin. These two concepts are also known as qadar and qaza. Qadar is the knowledge, qaza is the creation of that knowledge. So in this regards, everything that occurred, everything is occurring now, and everything that will occur in the future is already known by Allah. And this is called qadar.
Okay, just to stop you just there for a second, does this mean that we have no free will? That everything is written in our life?
Now, actually, no. It doesn't mean that we do not have free will, because the concept of destiny in Islam should not be confused with fatalism, which is called also absolute determinism. Because qadar in Islam is a type of knowledge. And knowledge depends on the obvious. This is a very important equation. Knowledge depends on the obvious, but the obvious, the actual, does not depend on knowledge. Let me give you an example with this. It will make things more understandable.
Please do, yes. Sometimes it's good with those examples that you
give. Yes, definitely. Analogies help people understand the concepts. Yeah. Now, for example, if you Google sunset in a month's time, for example, let us say we live in Melbourne and we say we want to know when the sunset will be in a month's time. If we Google it, Google will give the exact time of sunset to us. Like, for example, let us say an example, 6:20 p.m. the sun will set. We get this information from Google. Now, this information is knowledge, but the obvious is the setting of the sun on that day. So the obvious does not depend on the knowledge, but the knowledge depends on the obvious. What this means is, if Google decides to change that information and make the sunset time in a month's time on a certain date, if they say it's 7:20 p.m., would the time of the sun setting change?
That's right. So
It will not change.
it's
Yeah?
dependent on the obvious.
Yeah, so the knowledge depends on the obvious, but the obvious does not depend on the knowledge. Maybe another analogy might make things more clear, more evident. Let me give you this one too. Let us say that you wish to drive, we live in Melbourne, and you wish to drive to Sydney from Melbourne. What you do is first you hit Hume Highway. It's pretty close to where we are now as well. And on the road, you will see a sign on the left side of the road saying Sydney 820. That's the distance, 820 kilometers. The sign is up there. Now, what is written on that sign is knowledge. And that knowledge depends on the obvious, which is the actual distance between Melbourne and Sydney. Now, that obvious does not depend on what is written on the sign, on the knowledge. So, for example, if we were to bring a ladder there and climb that sign, get a paint and brush, and change that number from 820 kilometers to 720 kilometers, would the distance between Melbourne and Sydney change?
No, not at all.
No, because knowledge depends on the obvious, but the obvious does not depend on the knowledge. So when we use this analogy and apply it on the concept of destiny in Islam, what is known already by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala depends on the obvious. So human beings do not live a certain destiny because it was written. On the contrary, it was written because God already knew how we would live. It's the other way around. So our lives are the obvious, destiny is the knowledge. So our lives are the obvious, what is written in the destiny is the knowledge. For this reason, we cannot blame destiny for our mistakes, can we?
No. But can we ask the question then, why can't we blame destiny for our mistakes? We make the mistakes because they were already known and written, if that's the case.
Yeah.
So isn't this the case? Like if it's already written and, in our destiny,
Yeah,
that we were supposed to be doing this?
Yeah, actually, that sounds right, isn't it? Because people will ask that question. If it's already known by God, then how can we be held accountable for our mistakes? Actually, the mistakes we make, the sins we commit, were already known by God, and they were written down. But this does not remove our responsibility, really. Why doesn't it? And let me explain this with another analogy again. Let us say that I have this unique computer program, a software that no one has. I have it at home. It's a secret. And I can type anyone's name in it. And this program will show me what that person will do the next day, the entire day, every moment of their lives. So if I, for example, typed your name, Waisad, all right?
Do you really have a program like this?
Yeah, I'll try it anyway. So if I type your name there, and if, for example, the computer, the program tells me every moment of your life what you will do the next day. And just for argument's sake, I know that it won't happen, but I see in this destiny of yours on this program that you commit a crime the next day. And then, when you get apprehended for it, when you get caught for it, can you turn around and say to me and blame me and say, I did this crime because you already knew about it and you recorded it? Can you make a comment like that?
No.
Or accusation like that?
No.
No. Because you were going to commit that crime anyway with your own intention, with your own choice. I only knew about it.
Just beforehand.
Yeah. So mine is knowledge. Yours is the obvious. What you did does not depend on my knowledge, but my knowledge of what you will do depends on the obvious.
What I'll be doing.
Yeah, yeah. So this is an interesting concept. So the qadar, the concept of qadar, has baffled scholars, theologians, philosophers in the past and continues to do so today. And from a historical content, if we look at it from an Islamic perspective, Islamic theological perspective, the historical context is this. Islamic theology divides destiny, the concept of destiny, into three different schools. The views of three different schools. The first one is called the Jabriya school. It was invented by a man named Jahim bin Safwan. So it was also called Jahmiya, but more popularly it's called Jabriya. And then there's the Mu'tazila school, a rationalistic school, and then Ahl Sunnat wal Jamaat, which is the mainstream Islam. And mainly the two towering scholars of this school is Ash'ari and Maturidi. Now, if we look at the Jabriya view, an extremist view, their view is fatalistic, deterministic. They say that human beings have no free will. In fact, they say that we are like a leaf blown in the wind. Wherever the wind blows, we go there. This is the Jabriya view. Mm-hmm. So, from an Islamic Ahl Sunnat wal Jamaat perspective, this is not acceptable, really. And the reason for this is, it would mean that God, the Almighty, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has taken us and pushed us into the water, into an ocean, and He is telling us not to get wet. And then there is no purpose of testing here, because our free will is negated, it is removed. We have no choice but to follow whatever it's written there. So the Jabriya view is not really accepted by the mainstream Islamic Ahl Sunnat wal Jamaat view. The other extreme is the rationalistic school, which is Mu'tazila, where they claim that human beings are the creators of their own actions. Their concern is really here was theodicy, and theodicy means the problem of evil. They argued that evil originates from human beings, human actions, and for this reason it cannot be created by God. Evil cannot be created by God. As you know, in Islamic creed we say, khayri wa sharri min Allah ta'ala. Allah creates both good and evil. So they are denying one of the components of this creedal fact. So they are saying that human beings create their own actions. And this is also unacceptable by the mainstream Islam. Why is it unacceptable? Because Ahl Sunnat wal Jamaat says the Quran clearly states that Allah, God the Almighty, creates us and our actions. The verse is very clear. وَاللَّهُ خَلَقَكُمْ وَمَا تَعْمَلُونَ. So,
I think, just before you continue on, I think there are two questions that need to be addressed. The first one is, if God creates our actions as well, why will we be held accountable for it? That's one. Mm-hmm. And the second is, if God creates everything, does this mean that He also creates evil?
Mm-hmm. I think these are valid questions, Listen, people would like to ask. I think so,
yeah. I think if we could just address these as well.
Yes. So if God creates our actions as well, as the verse suggests in the Quran, then why are we being held accountable? The reason for this is Allah is the creator of everything. Whether it is human actions or whether an electron spinning around the nucleus of the atom, whether galaxies, stars orbiting around each other, every action, every act, every movement, every motion in the universe is created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Islamic theology believes this. Now, then why are we being held accountable? The reason we are being held accountable for our actions is we have free will. The Quran, specifies this by commanding human beings to do certain things. And Quran says you will only reap what you sow. You will only get the results of your labor. The Quran specifies this. That means there is free will. So if Allah creates our actions, then how are we held accountable for them? We are held accountable because of our intentions. That's the critical word there, the intention. The process is this. We make the intention, God creates the action. So we use our free will and intend to do an act or action. It does not matter whether it is good or bad. God creates this action. The reason He creates the action is, even if it's bad action, He creates it. The reason for this is so that human free will is not negated. Because if we intend to do something bad, and if God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, does not create that action, then our free will would be negated. Then we would not have a free will. So in order to allow this test to go on, Allah creates our actions. So even if they are evil, our actions, He still creates them. So human free will is not negated. If our free will is negated, as I said before, we cannot be held accountable for our action. So whatever we would intend to do in reality was already known by God, just as the example that I gave about that software. It is already known by God. When the time comes for it to materialize, God creates it through the concept of acquisition, human acquisition, which we call kasb. Islamic theologians call it kasb. Kasb means a petition to God for the creation of an action, an human action. We make the petition through our free will and intention. As a result, if God wills, He creates the action. This is what the really process is. So basically, we intend, He creates. For example, if I intend to break a window, just an example, God will allow me to break that window, and He will create my action of breaking that window. However, I will be the responsible agent here. Why? Because I wanted to break that window.
That intention.
Yeah, the intention came from me. I wanted to break that window, and God created that action for me. So, does God create evil? God creates both good and evil. However, creation of evil is not evil. But acting of evil is evil. Committing evil is evil, not the creation. Because God may create certain things for many purposes, not just one purpose. I can give you one example, one analogy on this. Yeah. Like God creates fire, for example. Fire can be used for many good things. You can cook your meals on it. You can use it as energy source. You can heat yourselves on it. You can use it as light. Many reasons that we use fire for. However, if someone goes and places his hand into the fire and then burns himself, would he have the right to say the creation of fire is evil? That would be a wrong thing to say, because that is not why it was created for. It was created for many purposes, but you have used it for the wrong purpose. So creation of evil in actual fact is not evil, but the acting of evil is evil from an Islamic theological perspective.
Omar, thank you very much. That complex issue of qadar, destiny and free will, you've explained it in such a detailed and with analogies and so forth. It was very good. And thank you for being here again.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation.
And thank you to Islam Explained, and we'll see you next time, hopefully. Thank you.